Roughly 31 years later, and that iconic Lexus champagne ad still holds up. But what about the car that starred in it? The flagship of the then-fledgling Lexus range, the LS was arguably the first Japanese car to really make the European brand sweat. But several generations and decades later, does it still have what it takes to make Audi, BMW and Mercedes shake in their boots? We're here at the launch to find out. This mid-generation facelift sees some mild changes to the LS, mostly around the headlights and the front here, but it's really about some under-the-bonnet, chassis and suspension changes that have supposedly improved comfort, refinement and quiet in the cabin. There's also some all-new and improved tech behind the wheel, so let's check that out. The 2021 LS is offered as a 3.5 litre twin-turbo petrol V6 or as a 3.5 litre petrol hybrid V6. Both cars have a 10-speed automatic transmission and a rear-wheel drive. The hybrid and petrol LS models are priced the same, with only 2 specification grades on offer, and both boast a plethora of standard equipment. The F-Sport grade kicks off from $195,953 before on-road costs, while the Sports Luxury grade starts at $201,078 before on-road costs. Similarly, the hybrid and petrol performance figures aren't far apart, with Lexus quoting a 0 to 100 km/h time of 5.4 seconds in the hybrid, which is only 0.4 seconds more than in the LS 500. So we're here in the front seat of the LS 500 and there are a few key changes to note. For starters, one of my favourite things, some changes to the springs and some extra padding means the seats are more comfortable than ever. And on the F-Sport grade, it's semi-aniline leather, but if you opt for the Sports Luxury grade, it becomes L-aniline leather, which is just really soft and cushy and wonderful. On top of that, this 12.3-inch widescreen has now become a touchscreen, so you don't have to mess around with the touchpad if that's something that used to irk you on previous models. And finally, there's the Lexus first digital rear view mirror, which is similar to the clear sight technology used on Land Rover cars and essentially uses a camera view to augment your rear vision mirror view in case you've got big-headed passengers or headrests up in the back seat. The LS also features Blade Scan, an advanced adaptive high beam system that varies light distribution as required, and for the first time there's also a data communication module able to provide emergency services contact and stolen vehicle tracking. So the original LS was meant to be so smooth that it stirs the soul and not much else. So does that still hold true? I can confidently say that yes, it does. This is an incredibly smooth ride. Lexus has worked very hard to make sure the suspension soaks up all those lumps and bumps. And I can say that you're probably more likely to hear a bump than you are to feel it. You'll hear that thunk thunk noise, but it does an excellent job of cancelling them out and there's no harshness coming up through the cabin. Rear visibility for a sedan is actually great too, and that's thanks to that rear windshield being set nice and low and wide, so you get an expansive view of the road behind you. And in developing this facelift, Lexus says it did a fair bit of research into driver behaviours, and they found that a lot of drivers don't use the full potential of the throttle at any given moment, and as such they worked on really enhancing that acceleration feel from lower speeds and at a standstill. And it's true that power is delivered incredibly quickly and efficiently, and it's very punchy off the line, which is much appreciated, and in the hybrid as well it's very quiet. That same goes for the non-hybrid too. They're both pretty quiet cars in terms of engine noise. But in that hybrid, you just get a really nice silent takeoff, and then the handover to petrol power is also pretty seamless as well. In comfort and eco mode, the steering on the LS 500 and 500H is actually quite light. It's still very precise and accurate, but it's nice and easy to maneuver. If you want to have a bit more of a dynamic feel with a bit more weight to it, then you can pop it in Sport S Plus mode, and that also ups the engine noise. And interestingly enough, I found that it made the hybrid's engine a lot more noisy than the petrol model. So it's not a particularly sporty note. It's satisfying and there's a bit of a growl there, but it doesn't sound like an all-out sports car if that's what you're into. But it still goes away to providing that really dynamic, sporty feel. One of the things I really love is the full color head-up display, which has now been updated to add even more information. So now you get a digital speedo, live speed limit info, and navigation directions as well. So it will prompt you if you have an upcoming turn, so you don't have to take your eyes off the road, which is really handy. I really appreciate this widescreen touchscreen being brought closer and made into a touchscreen, because I always struggle to use things down by the gear stick while I'm driving. You might be a bit different. I do find that while Lexus's infotainment displays are really comprehensive, they've got all the information you need, it's the execution that falls a little bit behind. It's your arrivals, it's just everything's there, but the finesse and the polish is just lacking somewhat. That's my only criticism, really. These seats are incredibly comfortable. I'm currently in the F Sport, and that's semi-aniline leather, but on the sports luxury grade there is L aniline leather, and I found those to be incredibly supportive and cushy, and the headrests were particularly soft. So I can recommend giving that a go, because it did make quite a bit of difference to my overall ride comfort on a longer drive. It's also a really nice and quiet cabin in both the hybrid and the non-hybrid LS. It does a really great job of cancelling out the noises of other cars and any tyre noise and road noise as well, and you'll really only get the sound of the wind sailing past, which is a nice relaxing sensation. Now, in cars that I take grand touring, or even for a sporty weekend jaunt, I like a lot of tactile things to be in them, and my one gripe here is that this little titchy gear stick is not that satisfying to use. It's a little bit finicky, and it doesn't feel like it fits in nicely with the grandeur of the car. So I would have preferred a more traditional gear stick, if I'm being honest, but again, that's quite a small complaint. And while I've spent most of my test drive on paved roads, albeit rural roads, there were occasional moments where we had to deviate onto dirt roads, and I will say this car handled it really nicely. There was no wheel slippage. It was a nice smooth ride. I didn't feel like it was unwieldy or the steering was going to get out of hand or I was going to lose grip. So it is a nice solid car that feels quite stable on the road as well. The LS500 produces 310 kilowatts of power and 600 newton meters of torque, while the LS500H outputs 220 kilowatts and 350 newton meters. Lexus quotes 10 litres per 100 kilometres for fuel use on a combined cycle in the LS500 and 6.6 litres per 100 kilometres on a combined cycle in the LS500H. At the launch, several hours of spirited regional driving in sport mode returned a real-world figure of 10.7 litres per 100 kilometres in the petrol model, which later dropped to 8.2 litres per 100 kilometres with more freeway driving in the mix. Meanwhile, roughly 2 hours of winding roads in sport mode came in at 9.3 litres per 100 kilometres in the hybrid, but we didn't have the chance to see how it performed over a longer, more varied period of driving. The back seat might just be the place to be in the LS, with excessive legroom for the two outboard passengers, heated rear seats across all grades, plentiful air vents, and some especially fancy accoutrements on the sports luxury grade. Taller occupants, however, might find headroom a little more compromised due to the sloped roof. Thankfully, in the sports luxury models, the rear outboard seats recline for added room, and a pop-up ottoman offers leg support. Plus, there are retractable sunblinds, ventilated seats, and a massage setting for ultimate relaxation. This supremely soft and cushioned L aniline leather is part of a $10,000 options package on the sports luxury grade, and if you have the cash to splash, it really does make a difference. The only issue is that the LS has non-folding rear seats across the range, meaning the 430-litre boot in the hybrid or 480-litre boot in the petrol model is all the cargo capacity you get. Obviously, you've got the option of a hybrid to bring fuel economy down even further, but after a day's driving, the trip computer's telling me that we've recorded 8.2 litres per 100 kilometres in the LS500, just the petrol model. And while there is an idle stop system on hand to bring that down even further if you need to, I think that's a pretty great output considering we have been touring some winding roads in sport mode and really driving this thing hard. So I would say 8.1 to 8.2 litres per 100 kilometres is not bad for a day of heavy driving. And finally, the active cruise control with distance control works really nicely and also offers lane trace assist, which theoretically keeps you centered in your lane. But when I did try it out on the hybrid LS, I found that it tugged a little bit right for my liking, and I just felt like I couldn't relax and rely on it completely, and I definitely intervened. Obviously, it's not advisable to rely on it completely otherwise, but I've definitely trialed other systems that have worked a little bit better. So I found that it was a mixture of the car keeping itself centered and me intervening when necessary. The facelifted LS500 and LS500H are in Lexus showrooms now, and while they do face some fairly stiff competition in their class, there's no doubt Lexus really nails the brief when it comes to ride comfort, interior luxury and overall refinement. Plus, we know Lexus does hybrids well, and considering there's not much between the pair in terms of performance and price, I'd consider test driving both. Oh, and I also suggest splurging a little bit extra for the fancy seats on the sports luxury grade. They're worth it.